Hey everyone, Mr. MC here. This is a guide for round 10 of the 2021 FIA Nations Cup Stage 2 taking place at Laguna Seca with the Group 3 cars. And we'll get this started by mentioning that we are on the racing soft tires and the brake balance is at 0 for the Subaru WRX. As you make your way out of the last turn, you can exit on second gear to try to control the amount of wheel spin you're getting. And eventually, you want to bring yourself towards the right side of the track and brake just before you reach the 3 board. So you'll be braking hard for a while, and you want to try to nail both apexes, slowly easing off of the brakes as you turn in, and slowly getting on the throttle as you make your way through the second part of the hairpin. Then just as the gravel starts, use around half of your braking power. You just want to make sure that the car can still make a turn as you're slowing down. Stay on the left and turn in just before you reach the 1 board, and for the most part you just want to lift off of the throttle. Use a tiny bit of braking if necessary. Then bring yourself towards the right side of the track this time, and you want to brake before the 2 board before you reach the banners on the right. Brake hard for a moment and slowly transition over from the braking to the throttle. Then stay on the right. Look for the 2 board and you want to brake just as you reach it. So very quick burst of braking. Try not to touch the sausage curb that's on the inside of the track. Get on the throttle as soon as you can. Then for the corkscrew, you're going to brake before you reach the 3 board. Brake hard for a while, but also take advantage of the curves as you enter and exit the corkscrew. Slowly ease off of the brakes as you turn in. And once you point towards this empty area, that's where you want to start to get on the throttle. Very careful on the throttle through here as you can spin out if you're too aggressive. Go on 3rd gear just before you exit the corkscrew. Lift off of the throttle as you make your way through these left turns. Bring yourself towards the left and brake just as you reach the 2 board or just as the curb starts. Nice and easy off of the brakes. Bring yourself towards the right, and your final braking point is before you reach the 3 board or just after the curb starts. Brake hard for a while. You can briefly go down to 1st gear for extra rotation, but exit the final turn on 2nd gear and you are good to go. But that is all for the lap guide. Let's go ahead and take a look at the strategies. For the qualifying session, you only have 5 minutes to try to get a good qualifying time, and you're pretty much going to want to qualify alone, like away from everyone else, because the last thing you want is for someone ahead of you to mess up, re-enter, and to get in your way, and before you know it, your qualifying lap is ruined. So with this qualifying session, if you go for 1 long qualifying stint, you'll have up to 3 chances to try to get the best qualifying time possible. And as I mentioned earlier, qualify alone because you don't want anyone interrupting your qualifying lap, because even just a 1/10 of a second is going to make a pretty big difference here at Laguna Seca since it's a pretty short track. And with the track being narrow, it's going to be very difficult to try to get an overtake done. So trying to qualify well is going to be one of your top priorities for this race. And as you're about to start your first or next qualifying lap, just make sure you nail down the very final turn, as that will affect how you start your qualifying laps. So at the end of the day, you'll have 3 chances at the most to try to get a good qualifying time. This is something that you want to try to qualify alone at, so qualify far away from everyone else, as you want to try to nail down every single turn without interruption and just try to get the best qualifying time possible so you can hopefully start at the very front. And did I mention it's very hard to overtake here at Laguna Seca because, well, I know I mentioned that, but I just want to make that point clear. But anyways, so we're doing 17 laps at Laguna Seca with the Group 3 cars. So this is with any Group 3 car. Fuel is a ×5, so fuel is obviously a very big issue, and the tire wear is a ×4, so tire wear is also an issue. You're given the racing medium and soft tires, and both tires are required, so you do need to use both tire compounds so you don't get a 1-minute penalty after the race ends. And as you saw at the beginning of this clip, this race is a great start, so you do want the traction control at 1. And then after the race starts, you can then bring back down to 0 or whatever value you normally have it set to. And where you're starting will determine what kind of tires you want to start on. So if you're starting towards the very front, start on the racing soft tires to try to get away from everyone else. But the closer you are to starting towards the middle or the back, start on the racing medium tires, get the slower tire compound out of the way. And especially with Laguna Seca being difficult to make some passes at, you don't want to start on the racing soft tire if you're starting, let's say, in 10th place, and then waste that tire as you're trying to fight your way up and end up making a little progress. In terms of how long the racing soft tires can last, it'll mostly depend on the car that you're using. So if you're in a car that is poor on the tires, like the Ferrari 458, then you'll only want to be using the racing soft tires for 9 laps. So you'll be pitting around halfway into the race. But if you're in a car that is good on tires, like the Subaru WRX or the Peugeot RCZ, their tires are better. They treat the tires better, so they can go up to 12 laps on the racing soft tires. And don't be afraid to pit in a little bit earlier. So let's say you're in the WRX, you're on lap 10, but you see that there's a bunch of cars ahead of you that are really fighting it out. You can pit just a little bit earlier. So let's say pit at the end of lap 10 and switch over to the racing medium tires. That way you're trying to get an undercut done, because when you pit out, you'll most likely end up being under clean air, so you won't be fighting with anyone. So you can just focus on nailing down every single turn, so that when they pit, you'll hopefully be able to get past them as they exit out of the pit stops. And this will also be the case for those starting on the racing medium tires, because chances are quite a few people are probably going to end up pitting around halfway into the race to switch over from the racing medium to the soft tires for those starting in the middle or in the back. But you can still go for undercut, try to get that clean air so you're not fighting with people too much, and hopefully get past them as they're getting ready to exit the pit stops. And for those doing the undercut from the racing medium to soft strategy, you'll just want to be a little more careful with the racing soft stint, since you'll be driving on them for a bit longer. So just drive a bit more carefully, as you want to try to make sure that your racing soft tires can last just a little bit longer than usual. Now, in terms of fuel is a big issue. It's at ×5, which means that you'll most likely have to refuel. So fuel saving will be a thing, and you'll especially want to do the fuel saving whenever you're within 3/4 of a second behind someone. So whenever you're within 3/4 of a second behind someone, you're in the slipstream range, so you'll be getting a bit of a tow from the car ahead of you. So you'll be able to do a bit more fuel saving by short shifting and by being under the slipstream. And I would highly suggest trying to fuel save under the slipstream, as you won't be losing that much pace compared to just short shifting without anyone's slipstream. But anyways, let's go on over to the pit stop, because pit stop does take a while over here, and as I just mentioned, we do need to refuel, and that's going to most likely be the case with everyone. You're most likely going to have to refuel. So we're switching over from the racing soft tires after 12 laps to the racing medium tires, and we're going to refuel towards the cute little diamond that is hanging out in here. So this little diamond tells me that if I follow my current driving style, I'll be able to complete the race without running out of fuel if I fill up to at least this point. So right around here, that tells me that if I continue to shift at 75% in this run, then I'll be able to complete the race with just enough fuel. The pit loss at Laguna Seca is 26 seconds, but that is just for a tire change. You'll need to add a bit more time if you do decide to refuel, and that time will vary depending on how much you had to refuel, obviously. And with the refuel rate at around 7% per second, and I think I had to refuel 23%, I ended up losing an additional 3 seconds. So my total pit loss time was around 29 and a half seconds. So you want to try to do a bit of fuel saving if possible, because with the fuel saving, you'll be able to spend less time refueling, and with that less time refueling, you may be able to potentially jump a position or two compared to those who drain their fuel tank by going all out. But there are a couple cases where it's better to go all out instead of fuel save, and I'll be showing that with the Peugeot RCZ in a moment. But that's the general gist of the race strategies, where undercuts are going to be big here at Laguna Seca since it's really difficult to get a move done. Try to feel safe if possible by short shifting, especially under someone's slipstream, as fuel saving will make a difference, especially since you most likely will have to refuel. And once again, if you're starting in the very front, start on the racing soft tires, but if you're starting closer towards the middle or the back, start on the racing medium tires. And the racing soft tires, they can go up to 12 laps depending on the car if it is good on the tires. So with this run, I was actually shifting at around 75%, and I wasn't losing too much pace, and I was able to save a bit more fuel, and I ended up finishing with a 23 minutes and 32 seconds, and that's with the adjustments because I lost a bit of time due to the AI car being stupid and blocking me. But anyways, I do want to quickly talk about a couple of the cars that I did test. So unfortunately, I only had time to test two cars, the Subaru WRX and the Peugeot RCZ Group 3. So with the Subaru WRX, this is a really good handling car, especially for one that is a front engine rear-wheel drive car. This car turns in really well, and it's a really safe choice for a track like Laguna Seca. This car, I would say it handles a bit like a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, except, the engine's in the front of the car. But this car is still pretty stable, and it's mostly forgiving to drive. If you are too aggressive with it, the car will start to act up, but as long as you're not too aggressive with the car, then this car will be pretty easy to drive. It's also pretty good on the tires, so as I mentioned earlier, this car can easily do 12 laps on the racing soft tires, but in terms of the fuel department, it's pretty mediocre. So if you go flat out, you can only do 12 laps on fuel. But if you're shifting at around 75%, you can bump up that fuel duration up to 13 or 14 laps while losing very little pace. So this is a car where it will benefit a bit from doing a bit of short shifting, so you'll have to spend less time refueling. And I would also be careful when shifting anywhere before 75%, because at that point you're not going to be getting that much more benefits from fuel saving, and you'll start to lose a bit of time. But if you're under someone's slipstream, that's when you can be a bit more aggressive with the fuel saving. In terms of grid starts, the Subaru WRX, it's decent when it comes to grid starts. It's not the best, but it's also not the worst. And I also just want to highlight the issue with this car is just that it's pretty mediocre when it comes to the fuel. So this was where I was shifting at 100%, so pretty much no fuel saving, and I was able to do 12 laps on the fuel. So I was pretty much just about to run out of fuel, whereas in the first run I was shifting at 75%, and I had, I think, another 2 laps of fuel left. So this car, you do want to do a bit of fuel saving by shifting at around 75%, and if you're able to do it under someone's slipstream, you'll be able to retain your pace and save a bit more fuel along the way. Whereas in the first run, I only had to refuel for 3 seconds, and this one I had to refuel for around 6 seconds, so that is going to make quite a bit of a difference, especially under race conditions. In this run, so the no fuel saving run, I finished around 2 seconds slower compared to my slightly fuel saving run, so fuel saving is going to be a bit better for the Subaru WRX. But once again, this car, it's a pretty safe choice, it's pretty stable. So overall, the Subaru WRX, it's a pretty good, safe choice. And finally, the last car I'll be taking a look at is the Peugeot RCZ Group 3. So the bad thing about this car is that it bogs down at launch, but once the car gets going, then you'll mostly be facing with the better things about the Peugeot RCZ Group 3. And unlike the Subaru WRX, the Peugeot RCZ Group 3 is a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, so it's a bit more willing to rotate through the turns, which makes it a pretty good handling car, especially at a track like Laguna Seca. And just like the Subaru WRX, the Peugeot RCZ Group 3 is also good on tires. It can easily do up to 12 laps on the racing soft tires. But unlike the Subaru WRX, the Peugeot RCZ is actually better when it comes to fuel. So this car, it can last a bit longer. It can do up to 14 laps on fuel going flat out. And actually, you're not really going to want to fuel save in the Peugeot unless if you're under slow and slipstream. But if you're by yourself, there's no one ahead of you, you're better off just going flat out, because if you do try to fuel save by short shifting, the Peugeot RCZ, it'll gain a bit of benefit by having the fuel last a little bit longer, but your pace will suffer. And just like the Subaru WRX, this is another pretty safe, easy car to drive. It's not going to try to kick your butt every single turn, unlike some cars like the Ferrari 458. And yeah, this car, it's a pretty easy car to drive. It's pretty enjoyable to drive as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at the refueling situation. So this was me shifting at 100% in the Peugeot, because you can't really fuel save in this car, especially by yourself. And we're eventually going to see the car come in. It takes about 1 million years to enter, and it should be entering right about now. There we go. So you can see that we still have to refuel quite a bit, but we did have a bit more fuel compared to the WRX when that car was going all out. So going all out, I need to refuel for about 4 seconds, because the refuel rate is around 7% per second, and I had to refuel 27%. So around 4-second pit loss. So my pit loss in this run was about 30 seconds. Once again, this car, it's better off going flat out, especially if there's no one ahead of you. If there is someone ahead of you and you're in their slipstream range, then that is when you can get away with a bit of fuel saving by short shifting. And at this run, I got a 23 minutes and 32 seconds. So I think that's the same time I got with the Subaru WRX while I was shifting at around 75%. So these two cars, they're both safe choices that are still pretty competitive here for this race. And as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, I didn't have that much time to test a lot more cars, because this is a race where there's quite a few cars that can do pretty well. If you can handle it, the Ferrari 458 will be a really good car here, especially with its really insane launch. But that car is very hard to drive, so if you don't know how to drive the Ferrari 458, I would actually suggest just staying away from it. The Mazda RX Vision is also another really good car, as that car is fantastic when it comes to fuel saving or just fuel in general and on tires. So that is another potentially good car to use. And the Porsche 911 RSR is also another good car to use. It's very similar to the Peugeot RCZ, as they're both stable, good on tires, good on fuel. But the Porsche 911 RSR has a pretty poor start, worse than the Peugeot, because it has that super long first gear. But yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of the strategies. Once again, one-stop race where you will most likely have to refuel. Use both the racing soft and medium tires so you don't get a 1-minute penalty after the race ends. And with these current race settings, there are quite a few cars in the Group 3 car class that can do pretty well here, like the Subaru WRX, Peugeot RCZ, Mazda RX Vision, Porsche 911 RSR. So it's just a matter of finding a car that you're very comfortable with, and that is also decent when it comes to making turns at Laguna Seca, since this track is heavily focused on turns, and that is also pretty decent on fuel and tires. I think my voice keeps on cracking, but anyways, let's go ahead and take a look at places to overtake and the penalty steering zone. The main straight is pretty much your best place to try to get the overtake done, especially by taking the inside line. After that, it's going to be extremely situational to just playing difficult to try to get a move done, as once again, for the 100th time, Laguna Seca, it's very difficult to get any sort of overtakes done. The only penalty steering zone is hanging out over here before the Mother's Bridge, so if you have a penalty to serve, you'll be serving it right here. After that, Once again, very difficult to get any sort of overtaking done. Definitely don't go too wide through here because that is an incident waiting to happen. Very dangerous to try to get an overtake done at the corkscrew, but it is possible to pull it off. You just need to try to get the inside line once again and just be aware of where the opponent is so you don't push them off the track. And then through here, once again, very difficult to get a move done. The very final turn, which is coming up, it is possible to go for a move. Once again, go for the inside line. But after that, yeah, that's pretty much it for the lap. So that is all for me. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. Thank you guys for the support. Thank you to PlaySeat for supporting the channel. This is Mr. CA, wishing you a good race, and I'll see you in the next video.